Hi, welcome to the Online Jewelry Academy. I'm Professor John R. and I'm your instructor. Today I'm going to show you how to make a basic chain. But before I do that, let me just tell you, even the high-end jewelry stores, they use machine-made chains. It's virtually impossible for you to get your fingers into little tiny places with thin wire and make those really fine chains. So I'm giving you permission right now to go ahead and buy a chain and put your pendants and other objects that you make onto machine manufactured chains. But if you're the kind of jeweler who likes to take pride in the fact that you make every single part of your pieces, then you're going to have to know how to make chain. So what I've done is I've laid out the essentials for basic chain making, and I'm going to show you how to test your skills at the very end of this project. So what you're going to need is a torch that can get up to 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a butane torch. You're going to need a couple of pairs of pliers. I have a chain nose and a flat nose pair of pliers. You're going to need a flux brush and some flux to paint onto the seams of your various links. You'll need a pair of tweezers to handle your solder. You'll also need a soldering pick. And I like the solder pick that has the little top that kind of bends to one angle, because that way I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. But if you have a straight one, that's okay. Now, of course, you're going to need some jump rings to work with. And in a previous video on how to prepare jump rings, you can see how to coil the wire and cut the jump rings from that coil. I've also got a charcoal block on a heat-resistant pad. I have pallions of hard solder that are already cut and ready to use. I have a bowl of water for quenching, and I have a third hand that's equipped with a pair of insulated cross-locking tweezers. Now, as an addition to this, I have some safety aspects. I have a ventilation system. There's a video on how to make this ventilation system for your studio. And I have a pair of safety glasses. Now, you want to wear your safety glasses whenever you solder, because you never know when something could pop and land right in your eye. Okay, before I actually work with these materials, I want to draw for you on a piece of paper exactly what I'm going to do. So the first thing that you want to do is you're going to have a charcoal block. And on top of that charcoal block, you're going to space out some pallions of solder. Now, I'm drawing this extra big so you can see it, but you know that pallions are pretty small. Alright, so these pallions are going to be laid out with enough space that I could then flux the seams of the jump rings and lay the seams of the jump rings right on top. So I have a jump ring laying right there with its seam going across the pallion. The reason for this is you want to create, in the first step, closed jump rings. In other words, they're soldered shut. Okay? Alright, so the next step is I want to take one of these closed jump rings, and then what I want to do is on either side of it, I want to add an open jump ring. And I'm having two different colors here because I want you to see that there are three different jump rings that are involved. Now, these jump rings are going to be supported by a third hand. And I'm going to basically deal with soldering the open seams on the outer two. Now, I'm going to hold them one at a time. I'm going to have one far end jump ring suspended first. I'll solder its seam shut, and then I'll quench, and then I'll go to the opposing side. Now, what you want to do is you want to create several groups of three. So I'm going to have threes like this. The next step will be for you to then solder your groups of three together with another jump ring. So if you're well prepared and you've coordinated all of your supplies, you should be able to make a chain in an hour or two from all of your jump rings. This is something that Professional jewelers do at their bench all the time, and they will tell you it's just a matter of being organized. So what I've done is I've laid out the tools in pretty much the order that I want them. Okay, so you can see here's the solder block, and on top of this block of charcoal I've already laid out a number of pieces of solder, or pallions of solder. There's one waiting for its jump ring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the open jump rings and I'm going to hold it on either side with a pair of pliers, and what you want to do is you want to basically push the ends of the jump ring together as you kind of bring it to back and forth, wiggling it so that it comes together and shuts down, and that the two edges, or all the edges, are lined up. Okay, so I've shut down a jump ring. Now what I want to do is hold that jump ring with a pair of tweezers. I'll take a little bit of flux and I'm going to flux the seam. Now, there isn't much space. I can't get inside the seam, so the flux is on the outside. But don't worry, heat and capillary motion will cause the solder to come up into that seam. So anyway, I lay it down right on top of that pallion of solder. Now normally when you solder, you have to be very, very careful to gradually insert your heat into the operation so that the pallions don't dance away on the bubbling flux. But because here the pallion is weighted down by the jump ring, there's no way that it can go away. So I can light the torch and come right in and solder. So I'm going to turn on my torch, hit the striker, and I can come right in. I can get really close with the heat and just make a circle that just outlines the outer edge of the jump ring. Now you keep going around until the solder liquefies and jumps up into the seam. That one's done. This is the first set of rings to be soldered. But remember, you don't want to pickle in between steps. We want to take advantage of the fact that the solder won't stick to a dirty surface. Because of this, we can construct the chain from smaller soldered groups that are left dirty in order to keep the one jump ring that's clean that connects them from sticking to any other surface while we're soldering it closed. Now remember, if you're having trouble getting the solder to fill the seam, just focus the flame right above the seam. Solder is, as they say, a naughty girl who will go with the first piece of metal that gets hot for her. Okay, now once these are done, just use your solder pick to pick them up. Now I like to just kind of roll them and pick them up like that. They're hot, so be careful. But you see how that little turn on the end of the solder pick makes it really easy for me to just like handle all of these without ever touching them with my fingers. Now the best part about making a chain is that you work dirty. These are all little dirty pieces of copper that we're now going to quench. Okay, and I do not want to pickle these. So the next step is to assemble our groups of threes. So you're going to need to pick up your pliers again, and what you're going to do at one at a time is you're basically going to open up these jump rings and slide the closed jump ring into it, then shut this down, and then we'll pick up another unsoldered ring, and I'm going to open it up and again insert the closed ring into it. So all of your groups of three will look like this. Fresh jump rings on the outside with a closed jump ring that's already soldered and dirty in the center. Okay, I finished adding all of my jump rings together to create my groups of three. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder them shut. So what you need to do is set up your bench exactly like I've got mine set up, if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, just reverse it. But I want to have my torch on my right side. I have my flux and the flux brush here. Just directly in front of me is the charcoal block. And I've got the third hand to the left holding my work. I have my solder pick over here on the left side, and I have my quenching bowl. Now you're probably wondering, well, where's the solder? The fun part is I get to reach in and take a little pinch of solder and kind of just sprinkle it over the top surface of the charcoal, because I'm going to do what's called pick soldering. Okay, let me sit down and I'll show you how it's done. The organization of the bench is really important because you want to be able to be efficient within your own work environment. So what I want to do is first I'm going to dab into the flux and I'm going to swipe across the seam of the jump ring that's at the top of the third hand. Now when you put the jump ring into the third hand, don't jam it in as far as you can. Just use the very end of the tweezers to hold it, because this is a heat sink, meaning that the steel is grabbing away the heat that you need to make the soldering operation happen. Okay, so once you've got that covered with a little bit of flux, you can light your torch. Hit the striker. Okay, I'm going to use my soldering pick for this. Now what I do is I aim the flame directly at the pallions of solder until one of them balls up into a little perfect spear. Then I'm going to just poke it with the solder pick. Because the solder pick is cold, the hot meniscus layer or skin of the hot ball of solder will grab onto the pick, and it's at the very tip. That enables me to come directly to the end jump ring and apply heat to it. Now, I can tell by what the flux is doing what the temperature of that jump ring is, and I want to get it to a soldering temperature. When I'm there, all I do is I just touch the pallion of solder to the end above the seam, and it flows right into the seam. Of course, turn off your torch, quench your tool so you don't burn yourself, quench your work, and then turn it over so that you're ready to do the seam of the jump ring on the opposite side. I'll do one more just to show you how fast it can be done. I'm picking up the solder. I'm heating the ring, and I'm touching the solder to the ring when it's hot enough, and you can see how it flows nicely into the seam. And now I'm going to quench it. Let me finish these groups of 3 and I'll be back to show you the final result. Well, I finished soldering all of the jump rings into groups of 3 and I've laid them out. Now what I need to do is to join these groups together. So I'm going to insert one new jump ring into the middle of each of these groups in order to make them a group of 7. So I'll do that and then I'll show you how to finish it up. Okay, I finished soldering all 3 pairs of, or groups, I should say, of 7. There's 1, 2, 3. Each of these is a little bit over an inch long. So, of course, the last step is to use 2 of the remaining free jump rings to bring those groups together in order to create something that will be a little over 4 inches long. Let me join the groups together and show you the end result. Okay, I've taken all of those individual jump rings and successfully soldered them into a chain. And look at this. If I pick up one end of the chain, it will be very graceful in the way that it comes up and lays back down. And that's because all of the different elements are very, very secure in their place. None of them is stuck together, and I have good articulation. So the ultimate test to see if you've done a good job is this. Let's pick up the chain, put one end into a vise and shut it down. Then what you can do is pick up a tool. I usually use my solder pick, or sometimes I'll use the end of a needle file to do this, and run that tool through the other end of the chain and pull up a little bit with the tension. It should be like a bass fiddle where this is like a string. So I'm going to pull up and I'm going to keep that tension constant. And at the same time, I'm going to turn only in one direction. So for me, I'm going to turn clockwise. So I keep pulling, and you can see that it somewhat makes the links look like they're getting more organized. And I keep going, and it begins to look like the links are beginning to spiral. So then I keep going. And now remember, anytime that you solder, you're also annealing. So I should be able to ultimately twist my chain into a flat chain. Look at that. It's very spiral right now. I have no breakage, which is good. It means that all the links are soldered properly. Now keep your tension on it. And a little bit more of a pull and a twist. And voila! We have a flat chain. Now this chain can be pickled, and if you wanted to accentuate the flatness of it, you could hot glue it to a piece of wood and take a file and just file facets on the top of it. Now yes, you're probably thinking, I've seen that chain before, and sure enough, it's probably the type of chain that you would make if you were going to make an ID bracelet. I'm going to pickle this and I'll show you the finished product. And here it is, our finished product. With a little bit of pickling and brass brushing, we have a beautiful chain segment. Now, you could modify this plan by changing the gauge of the wire that you use or the profile of the wire shape to create all kinds of varieties of different chains. Now, you're going to notice on this one that you can see where the silver solder is on the copper. This could be plated out, or maybe you could disguise it by putting a patina on the piece. In any event, I hope you have a lot of fun making chains. Check out our other videos and products on the onlinejewelryacademy.com. Thanks for watching.